What is a true fact so baffling, it should be false? The record for most children born to one mother is 69. To the wife of Fyodor Vasilyev, b. 1707 c. 1782, a peasant from Shuya, Russia. In 27 labors, she gave birth to 16 pairs of twins, 7 sets of triplets and 4 sets of quadruplets. People were deliberately infected with malaria to cure their syphilis, and the man who developed this treatment, Julius Wagner Jauregg, https://n. Wikipedia.org, wiki, Julius_Wagner Jauregg, received the Nobel Prize for it. The extremely high fevers of the malaria infections killed the syphilis bacteria. Then the patients were cured of the malaria using quinine. If sound could travel through space, the roar of the sun would be deafening even though it's 93 miles away. From 1613 and 1620 a samurai traveled to Rome by way of Mexico. During this time, Shakespeare was still alive. Virginia had been founded for around a decade. Galileo was accused of heresy, and Pocahontas arrived in England. He met the Pope. He was made a Roman citizen. His name was Hasekura Tsunanaga, and was the last Japanese person to officially visit Europe until around 1860. The longest time between two twins being born is 87 days. Saddam Hussein was an erotic romance novelist in his spare time as the dictator of Iraq. Sauce. https://n. Wikipedia.org, wiki, Saddam_Hussein %27s_novels. Cheetahs can't roar, but they can meow like house cats. One day Mao Zedong saw a sparrow eating grain. Thinking that the sparrows were hurting China's grain supply, he and the Communist Party launched the Four Pests campaign. The Chinese military and population killed every sparrow they could find. Embassies didn't allow the Chinese to kill sparrows on their property, so the Chinese banged pots and pans outside the embassies 24/7 until the sparrows died of exhaustion. Unfortunately for the Chinese, sparrows mainly eat insects, not grain. The locust population exploded and 43 million people starved to death. https://www.worldatlas.com articles, The Four Pests Campaign Objectives, Execution Failure and Consequences. HTML. There were more planes destroyed in World War II than there are currently intact planes on Earth today. There is an extremely rare condition called Stone Man syndrome. It causes any smallest damage done to tissue to regrow into a bone. Speaking briefly, people affected by this sickness slowly turn into living statues as they get older. Removed. More people died making the V-2 rockets during WW2 than were killed by them. Stalin, Hitler, and Freud all lived in Vienna at the same time. If you earned $1 every second, it would take 2,921 years to have more money than Bill Gates. Giraffes eat bones. A500 Cigarette smoking, beer drinking brown bear named Wojtek was enlisted and served in the Polish army during World War II. Private Wojtek helped the Polish win the brutal Battle of Monte Cassino, and was even promoted to corporal. Following the war, he retired in Scotland. We live many times closer to the last dinosaur than the first and last dinosaur did to each other. The life of Frane Selick, the luckiest unlucky man in the world. January 1962. Frane is riding on a train through a freezing canyon when it fell into an icy river. All 17 other passengers died while he escapes with a broken arm and hypothermia. 1963. On his first plane trip he was sucked out of the plane's door and landed in a haystack, unscathed. 19 other people were killed in the crash. 1966. He was riding in a bus when it skidded off the road into yet another icy river. 4 passengers drowned while he only received some minor cuts and bruises. 1970. His car's engine burst into flames while he was driving, but he managed to escape before it exploded. 1973. In yet another driving incident, his car's engine was doused with hot oil from a broken fuel pump. This caused flames to shoot through the air vents, singing off all of his hair. He was otherwise unharmed. 1995 he was hit by a bus but only sustained minor injuries. 1996 to escape a head-on collision with a United Nations truck on a mountain curve. He swerved into a guardrail that broke on impact. To save himself, he jumped out of his car's open door and grabbed onto a tree branch as he watched his car plummet off the cliff. Suffice to say the guy had a complicated relationship with the Grim Reaper. If every single person on the entire planet took part in a rock-paper-scissors contest, where everyone paired up and played, losers were knocked out and winners stayed on, etc., you would only have to win 33 times in a row to beat all 53 billion people on the planet. When Mount Everest was first measured, it was exactly 29,000 feet. It was reported as 29,002 because exactly 29,000 was not believable. To scale, the distance between a nucleus and orbiting electron is 16 times longer than the distance between the Sun and Pluto. When a woman with breast implants is cremated, the implants will melt into goo. It drips to the bottom of the furnace, and needs to be cleaned up once cooled. There is no universally accepted definition of vegetable. It's a cultural and culinary term, and varies from place to place. Oxford University predates the Aztec Empire by over 200 years. And, for fun, one of my favorites. Woolly mammoths were still around at the time the Great Pyramids in Giza were built. An eyewitness to Lincoln's assassination at Ford's Theater told his story on national television. Sauce fail rate is over 80%, https://www. NBC News. Com. News, US News, investigation breaches US airports allowed weapons through N367-851. I personally know someone who in his carry-on accidentally packed a loaded handgun, made it on the plane, and was so freaked out when he landed, he upsed it back home and took a Greyhound bus after his trip. Nintendo was founded in 1889. If you're launching from Earth, the most difficult place to reach in the solar system is the Sun. The reason for this is that to fly directly into the Sun you need to first launch from Earth, and then remove all of your orbital velocity around the Sun. Anything less will just put you into a different orbit around the Sun rather than directly into it. The amount of power required for that to do it directly is basically impossible currently. As an alternative you could, for relatively little power, fly all the way out to Pluto distance, slow down much less, and then fall back into the Sun. The trade-off being the travel time is now about 90 years. There are other in-between paths that could get you there for different balances of energy and time, but all of them are tougher than getting basically anywhere else in the solar system with an equivalent balance. There's a mission currently traveling to study the Sun, the Parker Solar Probe. It won't be flying directly in, but plans to make the closest passes than any probe ever has. It's going to make 7 passes by Venus to shed speed so it can get closer and closer to the Sun. The full flight time is planned as just less than 7 years. As of this post they are 1 week shy of a year in. President John Tyler, born in 1790, has 2 living grandsons. It's pretty well known by now, but calculators today have more computing power than Apollo 11. We got to the moon with slide rulers and huge balls. Switzerland has accidentally invaded Liechtenstein thrice in the last 50 years. https://n. Wikipedia. Org, Wiki, Liechtenstein %E2% 80% 93 Switzerland _relations. On the first time in 1976, Swiss military got lost and ended up in Liechtenstein, so the Liechtensteiners offered them drinks like proper hosts. On the second time in 1992, Swiss military forgot that a certain observation post was actually not in Swiss territory but in Liechtenstein territory, so they just said sorry and forgot about it. Then again in 2007, the Swiss army got lost and entered Liechtenstein, but eventually realized they weren't in Switzerland anymore, Toto, so they turned back. Liechtenstein didn't even know this happened till the Swiss apologized, again, to which they basically said, "No problem, bro." Takeaways. The Swiss army are bad with directions. The Liechtenstein army people are chill bros. A morbidly obese person can survive with absolute starvation without any sickness or feeling ill, under close control. There have been studies since 60s. There is a patient in 1973 who went under a 382-day starvation diet for therapeutic purposes under close control with only vitamin and mineral supplements and water intake without protein, carbohydrate or fat intake, no food at all. Dropped from 207 kilograms to 88 kilograms and maintained it. After a follow-up checkup 5 years later, the patient was 96 kilograms, stabilized. Prolonged fasting had no ill effects. If anybody is curious about the article, the PubMed ID is PMC 2495396. Horses can't vomit. If Earth was a basketball, to scale the moon would be a tennis ball. It would orbit around 7.5 meters away, which is a lot farther than most people think. If the nucleus of a hydrogen atom was a tennis ball, to scale the electron would orbit at about 2,500 meters away. There is no ball small enough to compare to how small electrons would still be at this scale. A million seconds ago was week before last, July 24th. A billion seconds ago was 1988-1987. Ed. Made some rounding errors. We're looking at November, 1987. There is no good metric for the number of languages on Earth. This is mostly because linguists cannot agree on what constitutes a new language and what constitutes a dialect of an existing language. The best current metric of how many languages exist is the number of translations of the Christian Bible. The Tyrannosaurus rex lived closer in time to us than it did the Stegosaurus. Even if 99% of Earth's population thought you were unattractive, 76 million people would still find you attractive. Removed.